Some things are simply unimaginable right up until you are looking at them, and even then, you might not believe. Love is that way. So is death. Belgargaroth was without a doubt in that limited assortment of the impossible. But then, the name should have been a clue. When something sounds like a giant vomiting up a dwarf, you should not expect sunshine and daisies. Age of Swords, Book 2 of Legends of the First Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. If you haven't watched my review of Age of Myth, Book 1 yet, I'll have that in the cards and linked down in the description. Now, I will do my best to keep this spoiler free for not only Age of Swords, but also Age of Myth. But this is a book 2, so there will be some things that I just can't avoid, such as names of characters that obviously survive book 1 if they're in book 2. But for the most part, it should be spoiler free. Just as a quick reminder for what Age of Myth was about at a high level, it's convincing the human population that elves are not gods and war against them is inevitable. Which means if Age of Myth is about deciding to go to war, Age of Swords is deciding how are we going to win this war? How do we even stand a chance? The elves have magic users. The humans have a mystic who can speak to trees. The elves have bronze swords and armor. The humans have wooden spears and stones. So to say they're at a disadvantage is a bit of an understatement. So if they're going to go to war with the elves, they need quick advances in technology. Specifically, they need better swords. You can't fight against bronze with wood. It's just not going to work. In short, the humans are outclassed and need to figure out how to close the gap in a hurry. During my Age of Myth review, I mentioned that Sullivan intentionally makes the first book of a series very simple. He doesn't want you to have to take notes or go online to look things up or do rereadings or just struggle to remember names and places and the storyline. It's very simple. It's very introductory. So the big question with the book 2 is, did everything expand? Did things get bigger, better? Are there more characters and more defined world, intricate plot lines? And the answer is absolutely. Let's first start with characters. In Age of Myth, you had 4, maybe 6 main characters, and they were paired up pretty much the whole story. So you had Wraith and Malcolm, Suri and Persephone, and if you want to add numbers 5 and 6, it's going to be Arian and Prince Mandalay. In Age of Swords, Wraith and Malcolm actually take a step back from the main storyline. And that allows Persephone, Suri, Mandalay, and Arian to take up a little bit of a larger role. But you also have some characters that were briefly mentioned in Age of Myth becoming main characters in Age of Swords. There's Moya, who's out to prove that she's more than just a pretty face. There's Brynn, who is a very young keeper of ways that realizes there has to be a better way of keeping track of their history than just verbally telling the stories from one generation to the next. There's Roan, who is a genius but suffers from either PTSD due to a horrible childhood or has Asperger's or some combination of both. I'll admit, when I was reading Age of Swords, I felt it was more Asperger's. Later on in the series, I start to lean more towards PTSD, and I've gone back and forth, so feel free to make up your own mind. And then finally, you have Gifford, who is a very kind, intelligent man, but he was born with a twisted spine, so he has some handicaps, one of which makes it very hard for him to stand, let alone walk, and the other prevents him from being able to speak R sounds. And I struggled with R sounds as a child, so I could really relate to what he was going through and trying to figure out different words so that he could avoid using R's. During my Age of Myth review, I mentioned Suri was my favorite character. After Age of Swords, I'm not sure if that's still true. I love her just as much, but some of these new characters are fantastic. I really connected with all of them. Now let's move on to world building. Age of Myth, you have humans and elves, and the plot pretty much settles around one village, and that's it. In Age of Swords, you're introduced to dwarves, you see some giants, you learn more about the magic system, you travel to the dwarven city. There are also a few things from R'yr Revelations that were mysterious and unexplained in that series that you see where they came from and how they're created. So the world building in Age of Swords is significantly more expansive than it is in Age of Myth. In Age of Myth, the plotline was pretty straightforward. It was the elves can be killed, and oh no, now they're coming back for revenge. In Age of Swords, it's much more interesting. You have the human clans that have all decided war is coming, but not all of them get along. So how are these clans going to coexist? And then who's going to be the single leader of all the humans? Who's going to be the Keenek, as they call it? None of the chiefs want to let go of any of their power. And then you also have the plot line of dealing with the dwarves. In the history of fantasy, dwarves have not always been the most trustworthy species. And then you have the elves. I mentioned in Age of Myth that some of them were starting to drink their own Kool-Aid, and they're like, you know what? We are gods. These other elves don't know what they're talking about. They should be our servants, and those humans, they're filthy animals. Well, obviously the other group of elves aren't going to like being treated like servants, so you get some conflict there and a potential civil war at the same time that they're trying to fight the humans. So the plot lines are significantly more intricate and suspenseful as far as what's going to happen. And then you have some characters behind the scenes that seem like they know a whole lot more about what's going on than they're letting on, and that they're really behind the scenes pulling the strings. So you got a few, I'm gonna say, horde-like characters. Now the last thing I want to talk about is that in Age of Myth, one of the things I didn't like about it was I just didn't feel the emotional impact of a lot of what was going on. Specifically Persephone and early on the losses that she suffers. In Age of Swords, I can confidently say that is not a problem. There are some hard-hitting, emotional moments in this story, and my heart breaks for the characters that had to pay the price for moving on and getting everyone to the end of the story. So to sum up, Age of Swords, definitely a step up from Age of Myth. I felt Age of Myth was about a 3.5 star review for me. Age of Swords, solid 4 stars. As far as my rating out of 100, Age of Swords got a 79, which puts it right around Cold Days, book 14 of the Dresden Files, and Voice of War, book 1 of the Threadlight series by Zach Argyle. So this is in very good company. One last thing that I just remembered, at the beginning of each chapter, you get a little blurb from what's called the Book of Brynn. That kind of foreshadows what's going to happen in that chapter. So if you don't want that, just skip it. Or read it at the end of the chapter. Go back and see what Brynn had to say about it. Last thing before I end this video, I am giving away the entire R'yr Revelation series, brand new. If you'd like to enter, go watch my Age of Myth review. Details are in there. And then if you want a second entry, so you have to have the first entry from Age of Myth already. If you want a second entry, just leave books in the comment again on this video. So that's all I have. Let me know if you agree with my review. Did Age of Swords step it up from Age of Myth? And are you reading or planning on reading Legends of the First Empire? And until next time, bye.